This summer, the Women's World Cup will see teams from the 6 major confederations head to Australia and New Zealand for a centrepiece tournament hailed as the culmination of years of explosive growth in the game. Expanded from 24 nations to 32, the month-long 64-match event will shine a global spotlight on stars like Alexia Putellas, Sam Kerr, Katerina Macario, and fresh from the historic European Championship win, England's own Lionesses. But as things stand, it'll be broadcast to an audience of precisely no one in countries like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and England. This is FIFA's broadcast blackout of the Women's World Cup. In a nutshell, it's all about money. In previous years, the broadcast rights for the Women's World Cup were always bundled in with those of the men's. That meant that TV networks would get exclusivity over a number of their games and that sponsors would get similar levels of exposure across both tournaments. FIFA were never overly specific about what level of value they regarded the women's package as adding to the overall deal, but with the rights to the 2022 Qatar World Cup selling for between $100 and $200 million per broadcaster, they clearly believed that there was significant money to be made separating the two tournaments. Thus, in 2021, Gianni Infantino announced plans to auction the competition separately as part of a long commitment to increase both the funding and the prize money in the women's international game. And so far, the good news is that has borne fruit. This year's tournament will see the women get a near 300% increase in their prize money, and the budget allocated for the event's organisation is coming in somewhere around the $125 million mark. While that's certainly not the $230 billion invested in Qatar, it is over 10 times the amount spent on the 2015 Women's World Cup held in Canada. However, despite these positive noises from the game's governing body and the huge surge in interest in women's football across Europe, FIFA have deemed the offers for the broadcast rights as currently nowhere near good enough to sell. Speaking at a World Trade Organization meeting in Geneva, Infantino said that the bids from Britain, Germany, France, Italy and Spain, the big 5 of European football, were simply unacceptable and a slap in the face not just to the players, but to all women worldwide. Following up on his own Instagram, he laid into those nations with claims that some offers had been as low as $1 million. Quite why this is depends on who you ask. For the broadcasters themselves, it's a combination of factors. Firstly, their respective experience of broadcasting the women's game in these countries and their estimates on their ability to then sell advertising space during those matches. The Women's Super League, for example, had an estimated sponsorship revenue of around £14 million this season, which, given that the Women's Euros had a record-breaking audience of 360 million viewers globally, shows that while audience interest can rival the men's game, the ability to monetize that interest is still lagging some way behind. Whether that's because there is a perceived disconnect between the kinds of brands that'll pay premium rates for sports placements and the assumed demographic of those watching women's football is also a matter of who you ask. But regardless, networks across Europe are still keen to protect themselves from the prospect of overspending on women's football, while they're not entirely convinced the advertising model is there to back it up. Undoubtedly exacerbating matters, of course, is the location. Hosting the event in the South Pacific means that the first round of matches will see kickoff times ranging from 2 AM in the morning to 1 in the afternoon in the UK. Something that will undoubtedly see the live fixtures take an enormous viewing figures hit in Europe, and mean that any primetime broadcasts will consist of little more than highlights packages. Two things that, again, aren't considered appetizing for most advertising deals. Infantino has addressed these issues though and said, to be very clear, it is our moral and legal obligation not to undersell the FIFA Women's World Cup. Therefore, should the offers continue not to be fair, we will be forced not to broadcast it in the big 5 European countries. The facts remain though that previous Women's World Cups have seen matches roughly garner around 50 to 60% of the television audience of that of the men's, which, let's not forget, is comfortably the biggest sporting event on the planet. That FIFA felt they'd immediately stumble on broadcasting offers of around the same percentage feels naive in the extreme, but some of them coming in at almost 100 times less hints to a far bigger problem in Europe than merely advertising cold feet. A deal will almost certainly be worked out, as no matter what posturing Infantino does over underselling the tournament, FIFA's reputation is such that any failure to secure broadcast rights will, rightly or wrongly, be painted as greed on the part of the organisation. Over 1.1 billion people watched the 2019 tournament in France, but over half of those viewers were based in Europe itself. The time zone difference is clearly a massive issue for these broadcasters, but with the women's game enjoying year on year of record interest and attendance, it's clearly a risk, if it even is one, that they should be willing to take. Ultimately though, this is just the latest in a very long line of hurdles that the women's game is being forced to overcome. Does the money make sense? And if so, how can FIFA and its sponsors most effectively and dependably extract it from fans? If there's one thing beyond the on-pitch standards and the number of fans in the stadiums that really signifies women's football's arrival at the very top table of the game, it's that these organisations now see it all as too important not to wring every possible penny from it.